The bell ended classes that October afternoon. Oliver put away his things without much enthusiasm. That was the first year in which he had decided that he was too old to trick or treat, so Halloween had gone from being one of his favorite holidays to a lot of nonsense and annoying children throwing eggs at houses. He was walking without much encouragement, immersed in his thoughts when he almost collided with Jimmy. Jimmy was a great guy, perhaps the coolest boy in the whole town, or at least this is what Oliver thought. This had not arrived long, but he had already shown who was boss since his first day of school. This was not true. He became a bully, but he did give a message so they knew not to mess with him. He was 1 year older than Oliver, so he had never had the opportunity to talk to him. Even so, Oliver used to greet him from time to time while watching him play saucer. Oliver hated saucer, but when Jimmy played the sport, he was a little less hateful, especially since Jimmy usually responded to his greeting at the beginning and end of each of his games. Even with this, neither of them had really spoken, so their only interaction was those brief seconds of each game. Jimmy smiles when he recognizes him and emphasizes that it was the boy from the games. Oliver limited himself just to remain silent and lower his gaze. It was something he simply couldn't help, although he knew he had to say something else. Jimmy was with his group of friends who were almost as cool as him, but the only thing what he managed to combine was a simple affirmative and a nervous laugh. At the same time, he thought and reproached himself for the stupidity of that answer. Although no matter what he thought, it was the perfect answer for Billy, who reciprocated the smile before he. Jose Louis interrupted them by asking Oliver if he would go trick or treating with the other children. That sounded more like a direct attack on a question, but he was quickly rescued by Billy, claiming that clearly he was no longer trick or treating. That was a statement that Oliver was quick to confirm. He even lied when he said that he had not done it for many years. That seemed to work and even seemed to make Oliver feel a little more confident. And without knowing what a moment it all happened, he had agreed to go to a Halloween party. He had already heard about that party, a load of kids dressed up at Donovan's house, which was always unsupervised since his father always he took the night shift on Halloween. Only he had never been invited. He didn't even know why he had accepted. It was more than obvious that his parents would never give him permission to go to older kids' houses at night to celebrate Halloween. But as soon as Jimmy suggested the idea, it was as if his lips had a mind of its own and he accepted without even hesitation. And after saying goodbye, he scolded himself all the way home. He didn't know exactly why he scolded himself more, if for having accepting without thinking, or that when Jimmy told him not to forget his costume, he only managed to respond with, "You neither." The rest of the afternoon he was thinking of some solution. He had not even bothered to ask permission. He already knew what the solution would be. Answer. When there was a little less than an hour left for the party, Oliver already had a plan drawn up. His parents never checked his room until very late to make sure he was asleep. Pillows and dirty clothes under the blankets would be the perfect blanket. He went out the window and climbed down the huge tree outside his room. He had no idea what exactly he would do to climb back up once he was down. Had not thought about going that far, even so he decided to worry about it later. Shortly before arriving at Donovan's house, he remembered that he did not have a excuse. Without any other choice, he decided simply pretend that he had one forgotten. But it felt even stranger to notice how this was the only one in the place without a costume. The party was full of masks of demons, witches, skulls, and ghosts. While he was just an ordinary boy, he was about to turn around and leave when he heard that unmistakable voice which jokingly reproached him for having forgotten his costume. It was about Jimmy, who had his face painted white with shadows in his eyes and some bruises painted on his face, and arms which looked very real. In his mouth he had a little fake blood, which pretended to emerge from it, and on his head he had a diadem which made it look like he had a knife buried in his head. Oliver could only praise his costume and claim that in reality the yes, he had pretended that his costume was that of a homicidal psychopath, since these tended to look like any other person, but that did not convince Jimmy, who without much thought took the headband off his head and placed in his making a joke that he was a psychopath who had gotten what he deserved. As the hours passed, most of the guests were already drunk enough to decide that it was enough to go home. Even Oliver thought about it for a moment. He had never been away from home for so long and so much. Less without permission, however. To his surprise, Jimmy had only drunk a couple of beers, so he was still perfectly lucid and could start a conversation with him. The few who were still at the party, they were Jimmy's group of friends, which consisted of Emmanuel, Sandra, Augustine, and Laura, as well as some other young people whom he did not know more than by sight. All of them were having fun, and some were making prank calls despite the fact that Donovan had told them not to do so. But soon that atmosphere was abruptly interrupted when Donovan's father, who had not taken the night shift that night, entered in the house, making everyone leave as quickly as they could. While they walked through the deserted streets of the town Oliver was, along with Jimmy's group of friends and some other kids that he didn't really know, he didn't want to accept the fact that he was very afraid of returning home alone. So he was willing to follow whatever plan they came up with until the sun came out. This is the time when the butcher liked to go out, Augustine emphasized with a somewhat terrifying voice while hugging Jimmy by the neck. All the boys laughed Oliver more nervously, but he did it anyway. The only one who didn't laugh was Jimmy, who looked a little confused by the fact that they asked him to appoint a butcher. And since he was not usually one to be left with doubts, he asked what he meant. Everyone looked at him in amazement for a few seconds before remembering that Jimmy had not lived as long in the town as them, so he probably didn't know the famous legend of the butcher of the Zab farm, which was a legend that was always told to the children of the town so that they would behave well. There was even a rhyme in the regard, you will stay in the dark so as not to see him arrive. When he is close, there is no way out. The butcher will catch you and skin you with his knife. Still somewhat confused, Jimmy questioned what exactly it was about. Only that this time he questioned Oliver, who timely began to narrate the legend of the butcher. No one knew his name. Everyone limited themselves to simply calling him the butcher. The Zab farm had belonged to his family for generations and was located on the outskirts of the town. He had no friends, only his pigs, whom he was in charge of making suffer until the last day of their lives, where he was in charge of killing them to sell them to local butcher shops. The butcher was a bad man, and it was said that at night he could be seen performing satanic rites, and it was also rumored that the meat he sold was not only pork, but this it could never be proven, at least not until that Halloween night when one of his buyers, to whom he made a delivery of meat, inspected it and realized that the package not only contained pork but that it contained a human finger. Totally alarmed, the people of the town went to the farm where the butcher was still. They found him red-handed, since he was already dismembering the body without life of a man who had been missing for months. The people proceeded to lynch him, and like a large angry mob, they had no mercy with the man who was beaten again and again until his face was almost deformed. He was hanged on the outskirts of his farm and skinned alive. It is said that with his last breath he was able to pronounce a spell in which he offered his soul to the devil so he could return every Halloween night to take revenge of what happened When Oliver finished telling the story, the only thing that was heard was a laugh from Jimmy at the same time that he emphasized how silly and absurd that story was, supported by the rest of his friends and saying that it was nothing more. Then small town gossips, Oliver followed along with it all. Although inside he was actually terrified. That legend had scared him all his life. If a few years ago you would have wondered which it was his greatest terror, he would have answered without a doubt that the butcher. Even so, he made fun and assured that those who believed in it were a bunch of scared babies.